I guess I should start out apologizing for the lack of fingering in this story. Vaginas are mentioned, so it's okay. One summer, when I was 19, when I still thought recording music was a realistic career choice, I packed my suitcase into my Camry and drove across the country to intern at a very respectable recording studio in Sonoma, California. Let's leave the place unnamed, but let's also note that I went there because Tom Waits recorded some of his finest work in those rooms, and by rooms, I mean chicken coops. I found a room to rent on Craigslist. It was a cute house owned by a very nice couple. Every surface in the house was covered in pornography. Well, that's odd, I thought. Walking up to my room to unload my things, I saw in an office that the desktop background on the computer was a very zoomed-in photograph of a vagina. Oh, hello there. It's nice to meet you. I'm pretty sure it belonged to her, but who knows? The Bay Area is a strange place, and they did drink a lot of menage a trois wine. A girl around my age rented the room next to mine. She cried and talked on the phone a lot. I offered her weed once, and she said no, and then we avoided each other. Settled in, I reported for my first day of duty at the studio. The owner, let's call him M, was a tall, fat man that spoke like a 55-year-old recovering alcohol and cocaine addict, because he was a 55-year-old recovering alcohol and cocaine addict. He moved like a wounded bear, waddling through space and time, pounding his legs into the earth, forcing his words out of his mouth, spraying spit in a perimeter all around him. "Joe from Texas," he said. "Do you know how to use a squeegee? I need you to wash my BMW. You need to know how to use a squeegee properly." I actually did not know how to use a squeegee properly, but I didn't tell him that because I didn't want him to think I was an idiot. "Get to work, Joe from Texas, and welcome. I'll tell you about the checklist later." His car was parked beneath a tree. It was a windy day, and every time I would wash and dry a spot, leaves would fall down and stick to the spots I had just cleaned. I cleaned them again, and more leaves would fall down, and more leaves would stick. This went on for some time until M came out to inspect his beloved BMW and said, "It's been 2 hours, and it doesn't look clean. Why are there all these leaves on my car? Are you a retard, Joe from Texas? Are you a worthless cocksucker? I hope not. Go pick some weeds." He handed me a very modest and ineffective pair of garden shears. They were more like scissors, and there were so many weeds. The studio was an old chicken farm. It was a compound, really. There were multiple barns, living quarters, offices, and storage units. It was summer, and the weeds grew up as fast as I could pick them. I told M landscaping with a pair of scissors was not an optimized workflow. "Use a lawnmower, then," he said. The lawnmower, of course, was a piece of shit. After 5 minutes, it would overheat and break down. "The fuck did you do? God damn it, you broke my lawnmower, you retard from Texas." "I'm just mowing. You said to use the lawnmower," I said. "Well, look here, you worthless cocksucker, you're overheating it." "But you said hurry up." "I don't give a fuck what I said, you fucking idiot." For M, the whole world was made of cocksuckers and worthless cocksuckers and retards. That included me and anyone who wasn't him. Each morning I picked up the checklist of my duties: sweeping, Swiffering, cleaning the toilets, washing laundry, checking for spiders, killing spiders, dusting, double-checking the checklist, and usually getting yelled at about the checklist. The farm ran off unpaid labor. There was myself and 2 other interns, Ronnie and Chris. Marshall was the office manager, and he actually got paid, but he got paid chicken shit, usually late chicken shit. There was a dude named Matt who actually recorded music there, and he got paid $10 an hour. So that was making it. That was the dream. $10 an hour. M did have a sensitivity about human suffering. He could tell when your psyche was fragile. He would ride you right up to the moment when you were about to break down and drive a pair of gardening shears through his or your own skull. And that's when he would walk up, put his arm around your shoulder, and tell you how hard you've been working. "Let's take a break," he'd say. "You boys go smoke a cigarette. I'm going to go get you some organic sandwiches." And so we'd sit there, eating our organic sandwiches together, believing that he had an ounce of compassion in his heart, when really, he understood and manipulated relationships between Stockholm Syndrome and people's blood sugar levels. Every day for lunch, M would announce, "I am taking my rest time. Don't come find me." And he would walk out into the field with a large grapefruit in his hand. 45 minutes later, he would return looking relaxed and refreshed. One day, Chris and Ronnie came in, snickering and whispering, "I just can't believe it." What? What can't you believe? They told me I needed to go see for myself. So the next day, when M took his lunch, I trailed behind him and snuck behind the garage. I hid in the tall weeds and crept forward, looking for a view, and there he was, our big, tall, fat, morally reprehensible reptile of a boss, laying nude in the sun in the golden wheat fields next to an empty grapefruit, masturbating. It was like a William Blake poem. I confirmed my experience with the others, and they let me pick the music in the office that day. They only did that once. An old woman had a little house on the property. Her family owned some land or something like that. One day she asked me if I could help her move some soil from her car to her garden, and I was happy to help her out. She told me I was a nice young boy. She then showed me her marijuana grow house and made me promise not to tell anyone. Once a week, she would ask me for 10 minutes of help in her garden and then place an eighth of really, really good weed in my hand, always reassuring me that I was a nice young boy. One of our most important duties was that of the night watchman. Many clients chose to sleep until 3 in the afternoon, which meant they worked until 3 in the morning, so each night, once the rest of the staff went home, I would get high and assume my watchman duties, pacing outside, smoking cigarettes, and watching the office cats square off but never engage with the local raccoons. And then I'd pick out some guitars from the storeroom and noodle until the engineers told me to go home. Usually it was 4 in the morning, and the idea of driving back home to fall asleep for a few hours and driving back to work at 8 seemed pointless, so I slept on the couch and set my alarm, pretending I just got there early in the morning the next day. Sleeping where you work is a great way to lose your grounding in reality. And then I sort of wrecked the van at Bohemian Grove. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Bohemian Grove, but Alex Jones has a popular YouTube film about it. It's a beautiful redwood enclave full of rich Republican fascists. They do take your phone, there is no photography, they don't allow women after lunch, and they do get naked in the hot tubs with each other. But everyone in California gets naked with each other, myself included. Anyway, I backed the van into a redwood. It's hard to drive in a treehouse city. M did not notice the dent. The day before I made up my mind to leave, M rented a tractor. His friend Jorge was going to tractor the field. The grain had grown too tall because of the summer, and it was time for trimming. At some point, Jorge had to take a break, and M, because he hated himself and everyone else and every single thing in the whole world, wanted to keep going, and told me that I had to use the tractor. I did not know how to use a tractor. It is harder to use than a squeegee. I told him that several times, but he insisted and gave me terrible instructions, and then I actually did it. I was tractoring, which is probably not the right word, but I am not a farmer. And that's when I ran over the baby turkeys. And heard their screams. And went down to see their mangled bodies. I couldn't do it. And then I saw the mother looking for the children, crying her turkey wails. And then I cried too. I wept. And I made up my mind to leave. Not the next week, but the next day. I was done. I was completely done. I had a long, drawn-out conversation with M in my head, telling him that even though he was a vegetarian, he should eat a big bag of dicks. When I told him I was leaving, and I said it out loud, the joke didn't land. But he gave me a hug, and he said he was sorry to see me go, and I left. Chris, Ronnie, and Marshall called me when they got off work that day. They wanted to hang out, and they really never gotten to know me. I told them I wasn't 21 and didn't have an ID, but they promised they knew a place. I went over to their apartment, and they proudly raised up a six-pack of Lone Star Light. For Texas Joe, they said. We had to drive an hour to get it. We drank the Lone Star, smoked a joint, and went to a bar where they promised I wouldn't be ID'd. Chris and Ronnie were acting strange, Well, do you wanna? I don't know. Do you wanna? Nah, we shouldn't. But it's a special occasion. So they spent $120 on a shitload of the best coke I had ever did. And then we went back to their apartment with some girls. I don't remember a whole lot, but I do remember Ronnie confiding me a story about sticking a wine bottle up his ass at Bonnaroo in exchange for some ecstasy. And then Marshall told me that I had to promise to keep playing guitar because I was really good, man. You got something. I remember us being on the beach and it being so dark that I looked up and saw the whole Milky Way above me, and I finally understood why they called it the Milky Way now, because it looks all milky. And then I remember the despair of driving home, all out of drugs with nothing to be done, grinding our teeth, letting dread overtake us as the sun rose. I got home at 7:30, and because everyone else had gone to work, I smoked a joint in the backyard and tried to get some sleep, but my brain was scrambled, so I just laid there grinding my teeth and thinking about how terrible the world is. Deprived and dysphoric, I drove 8 hours to LA, accompanied by the only thing on my iPod, Lolita, as read by Jeremy Irons. Mr. Irons' performance was compelling and brought new depth to the classic text that I didn't know was there. I checked into a shitty hotel and realized I had left something in my room, a piece of gum stuck to the bed. The landlords never attempted to contact me. I made it back home. A year later, I emailed M asking for a letter of recommendation, and he sent me a very nice, thoughtful letter on how I worked hard, didn't complain, and was a well-adjusted and effective communicator. And for a raging piece of shit with the emotional intelligence of a 12-year-old who should eat shit and choke it to death on it, I guess he wasn't all that bad. And that was my summer in Sonoma.